Yeah, it was on this date in 2001, 24 years ago, Kelly Ripa officially replaced Kathy Lee Gifford as Regis Philbin's co-host. How much longer did he last?
Probably about 5 or 6, 7 more years.
He was put out to pasture on November 18th, 2011.
Oh, okay. Well, now she's on with her husband, right?
Yes, eventually.
By the way,
I was Michael Strahan there for a while.
Michael Strahan was there for a while,
Yes.
and his gap in his teeth, and you know, when he flossed, it was with rope. Interesting. What did Kelly Ripa ever do before this? Have you ever thought about that?
She was, if I remember correctly, I think she was a dancer. Yes,
Okay.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, I never knew what she did, and I thought, Kelly who? I mean, Kelly Ripa. It wasn't like Madonna or something like that, or someone you really knew that was a big timer. But
And
of course, Strahan was a football player who turned into quite the personality, and has done really well for himself, and now does football analysis. But he also does these kind of shows.
And Kathy Lee, she kind of landed on her feet. She ended up doing the Extra Today show.
She did, and now she's on some commercials that you don't know what they're selling, but she's on the commercial.
I seem to
drugs
be.
that come on where you say, oh, yeah, they have like a Broadway musical and they're dancing along and about a pill. And you ever notice that everybody's always fat in those commercials? They always
true.
are. It's like they they're profiling. Don't judge me.
I don't think they're profiling. I think they're maybe just reflecting, perhaps.
Aren't you kind? You are so nice the way you go. I just love the way you do that. It's beautiful. Mark McKenzie with you here this morning as well with the Mackenzian rules of discussion. A little softer, gentler guy. Well, with that, we turn to Vallie Etienne this morning. She is, by the way, a first. She is the first to be on the podcast. You will see later on this afternoon, actually on the picture with me in our spacious studios here. Yeah, it's so spacious that she's sitting here and we're sharing a mic. So it's a little primal, but Vallie is a person who, and you're going to meet her dad tomorrow, by the way, who is Gracias. Is it Gracias or Gracia?
Gracia.
Gracia Etienne, and he's going to be with us tomorrow here to tell you about a brand new product that we are going to be endorsing, a service that we're going to be endorsing, and Vallie actually works there with him. But Vallie also, and this is why she's here today, is a podcaster. Tell people a little bit about who you are and get in here to the mic a little bit where we can listen. But Vallie is I call her a whirling dervish of excitement because she is, you talk about enjoying your day and enjoying life. Vallie is one of those. She's 29 years old, so she is officially a millennial, but kind of unofficially the heart and soul of maybe a Gen Xer, and she won't admit to being a Gen Alpha. But good morning, Vallie. Great to have you on the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. So essentially, I am a 29-year-old multi-mixed media artist with audio stories being my primary way of reaching the people. Yes.
So what kind of stories do you tell? And you podcast. I mean, you are officially a podcast, but you're a social media, a guru. You get out there and do a lot of stuff. But where do you get your stories?
So my very first show was actually radio, and it was called Your Favorite Cup of Coffee. And it was talk show based and music based. And I was just talking about things that I thought were relevant to our generation.
Okay.
And then that evolved to my podcast where I was just telling stories about my life because I was in film school. I was in California at one point. I was in New York. Through the pandemic, I was in my parents' attic. I had a lot of stories to tell.
Right.
And now I work on a podcast out in New Jersey as well that is called On the Set Podcast. And we tell set stories and we interview relevant people in our industry. So I'm very all over the place with the stories I like to tell.
Now, what are set stories? Tell me about that.
So I'm also in media production in general, so radio, TV, and film. So whenever we this is an interview-based show.
Right.
So whenever we'll interview directors, we'll interview people from BET, MTV, Paramount, all types of different positionalities that kind of give us a more in-depth look at what actually happens when you're on set producing stories, because people think shows like this just happen. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of work that goes into the stories that you guys like to enjoy on Netflix.
Unless they come and watch us, and they see there's not a lot of work.
It is still a lot of work. We're having a great time. And people, I think, don't understand, if you see a movie, production for that started a year or two ago. 2 years worth of work went in to you walking into seeing this movie, and that's my bread and butter. I live for that. So that podcast tells those stories. We launched our first episode last month, and our next one is on the 24th of this month. I cannot wait.
What was your first episode about? Tell me.
We interviewed a director named Rock Davis, and it's very interesting because before we interviewed him, or immediately after we interviewed him on set, he was telling us a story about his first time working with Diddy. And then guess who gets indicted the next month? We were like, do we publish this? But we decided to, because it's not like he was like pro Diddy. Diddy just happened to be there.
Right.
Like, he's very much an elevated person in the industry. And the stories are very much emphasized around what are the aspects about production nobody talks about that we need to start talking about. Like, what actually happens when you walk in on a call time that's 4 a.m. for the next 6 months to produce something. I love this show. I am so happy, and we start filming season 2.
Very cool.
Very soon.
Now, our show, you know, you can get on podcast later today, and you and I are talking about that later, and she's helping me hip on this. So because podcasts or something are relatively new to my generation. Your generation is used to having media now that's there when you're ready to see it and consume it. Okay, my generation was, this is the time we got to tune in, and a lot of people still do that, 6 to 9 here every day on WOYK, on the Gary Sutton Show, which we're happy they do, but they can also catch us on WOYK YouTube later on in the day, on our podcast, which is basically taking pieces out of our show like this and act like we did a whole lot of work to put it back up on the air, which we did and didn't. But anyway, you're a millennial, okay? And you're kind of at the back end of the millennials, I guess, but you're a young one. It's 29. So how do you view news? How do you view shows like this? Do you take time out to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to listen to it now, or I'm going to catch it later on? I'm going to do both. What are your thoughts on that?
So I have the privilege of being born to 2 immigrant parents, and they let my brother and I know that we did not have the choice of ignorance. It was our global citizen duty to know what's going on in the world. So my brother, who was way smarter than me, by the way, will sit and read a 5,000-page bill and like actually ask me if I read it in good faith. Like, no, I did not. I read my news in the morning. I'm 29, but I'm very much an auntie. I take my time to read my news. I like to read it. I don't like to watch it. I grew up reading. My dad's a huge bookworm. So is my mom. So I ended up being a bookworm. But my generation, the way we consume news drives me crazy because it's so podcast-based, so TikTok-based, so Twitter-based, it is an algorithm that is built towards views you already have. So you're not seeing conflicting viewpoints. You're not seeing ways that you can actually build your argument. You're seeing a bunch of people that are reinforcing the narratives you already have, which I do it too. I like to watch news that's based on the stuff that I already am interested in and agree with, but I still have to read the conflicting viewpoints. You know what I mean? One
of the things that I lament a lot, Vallie, is the death of conversation in the country. And I worry so much, and this is like the dear occupant worry that my generation has for generations beyond us. And of course, it comes from when I was a boy, you know, and we crawled up hills, 100-degree heat, 5 feet of snow, and you know, the whole deal. But you fight that a little bit, and I look at it and say, conversation. Do we still have the ability to have a great conversation in this country with all the things that are in front of us? You know, we pick up this device and we're walking around with our faces in it a lot of times, which I'm holding up my smartphone. And I'm guilty of it sometimes too, but conversation to me is still first and foremost. Beyond that, your generation, as you look at people your age or people that kind of think like you, how do they see it? What do they see? Is conversation still important at all?
Conversation in my generation, unfortunately, is dead. And I think the main issue is because people aren't willing to disagree with people with respect in good faith. Yeah. My views are a little bit more out there than the average person, so I had to develop that skill, learn how to have a conversation with somebody and get their viewpoint. 1, my generation's not interested. 2, literacy rates are down in America. And 3, I do feel like social media, cell phones, the screenification of our world completely changed how we receive each other, and we just never acknowledged it. One day we all just woke up obsessed with our phones and we were just supposed to eat it. We never sat down and discussed how our world completely changed by having all this information and access here. So I think that there's a small minority like me that recognizes that conversation is dead and that society misses that and we need it, but most of us are actually okay not talking to each other, and I think that that's crazy.
That's one of the things that I really love about doing a talk show, and Mark and I both, that we want to talk with people about what they think. And I think that we've lost what's become the conversation in this country is more akin to a verbal drive-by shooting, where we fire at somebody with something, then we sit and we wait for them to get their white noise out of the way, and then we come back with our second point that we're going to make after not having listened to what they said. That serves as conversation, when in reality, conversation is a reception by two different people, and then saying, oh, they got me thinking, what about this next spot? And that's, with me, people always say, well, what's the most important thing that a talk show host should do? And I always say, listen. But I would suspect in multimedia, it's the same thing, right?
You would think, right? Actually, despite how well we're flowing right now, that is a skill I had to learn, not because I was good at cutting people off. I was just so excited to jump in and get the meat and the potatoes.
Yeah.
No, the best person to converse with is somebody that knows how to sit down and just listen. And that's what makes me such a good interviewer, because I really do want to know what in your life led you to this viewpoint. Where did you go to school? Like, what was your mom like? Like, I want to hear, right? Because nothing exists in a vacuum. No belief exists in a vacuum. And point A happened to point B, and then we got to point C, which are your views. So I want to know that, but people are not curious about other people in general. People are mostly just thinking about themselves. That's what makes conversation so hard.
You may have answered this already, and we just have about 2 minutes left here, but it's interesting when we talk about conversation. Politics obviously has infused every part of our lives right now. And how does your generation, the people you're around, and I'm always interested in knowing this, how do they receive political stuff right now? Is in that same genre of, I'm not really going to listen, I'm not really going to talk about it, I'm just going to tell you my side, and that's all that matters. We get into that whole censorship kind of thing that we've just gone through. And I wonder about that. Why are people so afraid of having their opinions, their points of view judged?
I think a lot of it comes down to people don't like to look like they don't know what they're talking about, because politics are intentionally set up to be difficult to understand. That's part of the functionality of it. I personally like to know what I don't know about. Like, I read something on the news before I stepped in here, and I have to go back and do some research on it. But no one wants to look ignorant, and people are scared to say, I don't know. I don't have enough about this information. I don't know enough about this to form an opinion. People forget that's an option, that you can say that. Like, people don't want to be villainized for certain views, lose out on certain sponsorship deals. I understand that a lot goes into it, but I feel like if everybody approached it with more respect, it might be easier to have those conversations.
Can you stick with me for another segment?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to come back, and we're going to get Vallie on for one more segment, because I want to ask her a little bit about, for people in my generation and a little older in some cases, podcasting. You hear all these different words now. And you said something to me earlier off the air, and I want to bring this up. It's scary for some people, and they say, oh, podcast, what am I doing? Or, texting into a show, what am I doing? Oh my gosh, I got to interact. We're going to get this, maybe allay some of your fears when we come back here on the Gary Sutton Show. Vallie Etienne, our special guest this morning. She's hip, I am not. And she is all here and ready to talk about it a little bit more. 8:48 on WOYK. I'm Gary Sutton, back with more with Vallie Etienne right after this.